Sad day here today. Had to put one of my old dogs down. In 1998 we bought a 9-month-old Akita pup. Had it shipped down from Anchorage named Buster. And when he was about 3 years old, there was a guy around here in town that had a female about the same age. So we had him bred, and we had 7 puppies out of that. Well, we kept one of the puppies, a little female puppy, and named her Cassiopeia. And her and Buster were just as tight as they could be, and the best of friends. Buster tolerated Cassie as she was a pup and going through her playing phase and stuff, but they were buddies, and she grew up with Buster. Well, about 2 years later, one of the folks that bought one of the other pups, they got sick. They were both elderly, and they got sick, and they couldn't handle the other pup anymore. So I volunteered to foster him until we could find him a new home, and of course he was here for about a day, and Judy wouldn't let him go, so we wound up adopting Patty. So Patty and Cassiopeia were litter mates, and they all got along really good together with Patty and Buster and Cassiopeia. So when Buster got old and we had to put him down, and Cassie and Patty were still together. One time on a trip, we had them with us, and Patty got sick, and we had to have him put to sleep when we were on the trip. So Cassie was okay for a while, but over about a year period of time, or a little less, she started getting depressed. And so I started looking for a companion for her, and we found Zen. A lady had him, couldn't take care of him, and so we got him as a rescue. He was about 3 years old. And he immediately bonded with Cassie, and Cassie immediately came out of her depression. They were good buddies. And then of course we got Sakura, a puppy, just a month or so later. So they all bonded together, and Cassie came out of her depression, and we had 3 more good years with Cassie. So anyway, then we had Zen and Saki, and then of course we had the pups with Saki, which we kept. Well, we didn't keep any of them. My son kept one, and we wound up getting one back because the people couldn't take care of him. Anyway, Zen was around, and he was Cassie's protector, and he chased bears off of the property and a bunch of stuff. He was a pretty good dog. He adopted real well. He got sick here about 4 weeks ago or so, and we thought we were going to lose him then, but he kind of came out of it and got to where he could get around again, but he never did come fully out of it. We thought he was going to come out of it, but last night he got down in a creek here, and then got up and tangled up underneath a bunch of stuff and couldn't get out, and we had to get up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had to pick him up and get him out of the hole that he got in, and he just couldn't recover from that. He just went down, and so he just started looking at me today. He was wandering around, barely getting around, and he looked at me today and told me it was time. So we had to put him down, and he's resting up there with Buster and Saki now. So I've been working on this trunnion for the table saw, and I got the adjustments for it and everything all fixed up yesterday, and I just sat in here and cleaning these up, and I took the wire wheel and cleaned up these polished faces here that didn't have paint on them, that were rusty. The painted surfaces of these castings were actually in really good shape. They just had a lot of dried on sawdust, oily sawdusty stuff on them, and I've just spent the time cleaning those up. Got those all cleaned up real now and real pretty. And I've polished out with a wire brush these holes, these mounting holes and stuff here. Well, I was thinking seriously about reaming out these holes here where this Arbor pivots on the arm there for the depth of cut. But as I got to looking around, these bushings that I made up, this pin is 5/8 of an inch, and these bushings are 3/4, and I don't have a 3/4 inch reamer to do that with. Well, I've got those polished out pretty good, and I think they'll be fine if I just put some lubricant on these, some dry moly lubricant on these, and put them back together like that. So we polished up all these surfaces and got all the sawdust cleaned up off of everything. So I'll go ahead and wash these down with some acetone, and then I'm going to wax everything up, especially these polished surfaces here, these that rub or that are polished up. I'm going to wax everything up real good with some paste wax. Don't want to grease anything up because, or oil anything up, because then the sawdust sticks to it again like it did before. So I use dry moly lube on all the moving points, moving parts, and I'll just use paste wax on everything else, and that will make everything nice and slippery so the sawdust doesn't stick to it like it did before, hopefully. Anyway, those are looking pretty darn good now. The castings, they're all cast iron, but they didn't have any rust on them or anything. The only thing that was rusty was these faces. They were just had a little bit of surface rust on them, no pits or anything in them. Mice didn't get in there and pee on all of them. So anyway, that looks pretty good. I'll get these all cleaned up and get that trunnion put back together, and then I'll start working on this tabletop. The bottom of it is just like the trunnion pieces. It's nice and clean. There's no rust in it, I should say. It's got lots of sawdust in it and stuff that's packed in, and they need to be cleaned up. But the ground surface on the other side is pretty rusty, so that'll need to be cleaned up, like I did with the shaper and the jointer. Well, the trunnion is all cleaned up now, and I just got it put back together. It's just on a temporary basis for now. I still have to get this all the way put in here where the blade gets raised up and down. I just have it stuck in there a little bit, and I've got the pinion gears, or the rack and pinion, in there together. So that stuff still has to be lubed up with some molybdenum disulfate. The same here with these ends that the caps here that the pivots on. So I've got the adjustment here. Again, that has to be, I got to make a fiber washer for these. They had fiber washers in them here so that this would turn, or as a friction or whatever. But anyway, that works now, more or less. So I got it cleaned up, and then I waxed, put the paste wax on everything. Not so much to make it pretty as to protect it from rust, and that'll help keep the sawdust and stuff from sticking to it. And then I won't have any oil on things to attract it either on any of these pivot points if I use the moly lube on there, the spray lube on there. Well, anyway, that looks pretty good. I got it figured out how to put it together. I had to use a copy of the parts manual here to figure out how everything went back together, but I got it back together so that can be bolted onto the table. But before I do that, I'm going to start working on the table and get it cleaned up. The bottom of it is got sawdust and stuff on it. Otherwise it's in pretty good shape, but the top of it is a mess with the rust and stuff on it. So we'll get that cleaned up, and then we can put that back together and start getting this machine working. I put paste wax on here yesterday, and then I come out last night and wiped it off. Obviously it wasn't quite ready to be polished up yet. You can see the wax on there still, the white, and that looks kind of ugly, but I'm not really worried about the aesthetics of it. I put that wax on there mainly to protect this from rust and to keep the sawdust and stuff from sticking to it so much. So it doesn't bother me if the wax is dried out on here and showing a little bit. I knew a girl one time years ago, new car, and she waxed it all up and then went off and did something, left it set out in the sunshine at about 100 degrees for several hours, and when she come back, wax was all dried on the car and she couldn't get it off. I don't know whether she ever got it cleaned up or not. It was pretty bad. But that was a car out in the open that she wanted to show off, so this is a little bit different story here. This is mainly just to protect this stuff. I'm not worried about how pretty it is. Well, I've mentioned a few times how bad the weather's been here the last few weeks. And we just had torrential rains, a couple 3 inches a day, some heavy winds and stuff. Well, it kind of let up a little bit this last week. On Wednesday we got out and went flying to do some fish surveys. We went over to do some of the fall chum surveys, chum salmon surveys. Chum salmon run into a few areas late in the year and in the end of the season, and sometimes there'll be enough of them where they can have an opening for the commercial fishermen to fish them. So there's some streams we check over there to see if there's enough to check on what fish return and to see if there's enough to have an opening. So we went out Wednesday and did that. And then there was some other streams that we hadn't got good final surveys on for the returns of the pink salmon that we went and tried to do. We hadn't been able to get out and do them because of the weather. So we went down and tried to do those. Well, there was just too much water in the streams there Wednesday. We just couldn't see anything. It was still a little bit breezy, so we let that go. We stopped and didn't do that and couldn't get a good count. So Thursday the weather wasn't too bad. It didn't rain near as much. And Friday, yesterday, the wind dropped down and it turned out to be a pretty nice day. It was still rain, showers occasional, but mostly it was a pretty good day. So we went back down there to try to get those last pink salmon systems done, the peaks on them, and we were able to do that. Water was still pretty high in a couple of the systems. The ones that have lakes, big lakes on them, it takes the lakes quite a while to drain out from all the rain that we had. But we were able to get that done. But there's still a little bit showery, so when I got home I really didn't want to work outside. So I came out, worked on this thing some more, and did a few other things. So now, today, the weather is just beautiful. It's going to be just beautiful day to day. And it's supposed to be that way for about 3 days before we start getting into the crappy weather again. So I'm going to put this thing aside. I'm going to go ahead and squirt some molly mist on this, some molybdenum disulfate on the moving parts, and put this thing together as much as I can here. And then I'm just going to set this whole thing aside for a while. And I'm going to open up the doors, take the jointer out, and get these boards jointed while we have the good weather. And I think I'm going to take the 6x6s and 4x6s up and spread those out and see if I can't get some of the stain on those, to get some of the finish on those, get those to dry out. Now the finish, the stain, it says not to do it below 50 degrees. The sun angle is dropped way down here already. It's the 10th of September today, and the sun angle is already dropping way down, and the temperatures are dropping. So it's supposed to get up to 60, maybe a little above in the daytime, and down to in the high 40s at night. It might be a little cool for this stuff, I don't know, but it's the best weather we're going to have for the rest of this year, the warmest weather we're going to have for the rest of this year. So I'm going to try to take advantage of that and get the stain on those. We'll get these 2x6s jointed up, and then once I get that done, then I can come back and put this table saw back together, finish cleaning it up, because that's what I'm going to need to finish truing up these 2x6s before we put them on the shaper. I'm not going to have time to tongue and groove them, but if I can get them trued up, get them edged on one edge with the jointer and get the other edge done, maybe. I don't know if I'll get the other edge done or not, but get as much done as we can here. So I've got my molly mist out here, and I'm going to start spraying this stuff down. So this stuff will act both as a lubricant and as a protectant. It goes on like a paint. And this one doesn't really matter because this doesn't pivot in this spot. There's a set screw in there that locks that pin to keep it from pivoted in there, but that'll protect it from rusting. Now these two spots here, it does pivot on them, and it's got polished ground surface on the inside there where that pivots, so we'll get that on there. And the same thing with the pin. Okay, that's all together. It's still going to come apart, but it's as together as it's going to get. So this is going to set aside for a while now while I go ahead and go get the hangar doors opened up and get those 6x6s and 4x6s up out of the way, and get set up to start doing some jointing. Now the nice thing about this molly mist is it's going to dry, and once it gets flashed off and dried off and everything, it's not going to come off of this. It's not going to be greasy or oily, attract dirt or dust or anything like that. And it should protect it pretty good against rust. Going through these sleeves on there, that was what the problem was before, is those got all rusted up, and you got to oil those regularly and keep them moving, and otherwise they get rusted up. But if you put oil on them, then all the sawdust is going to come on there, and then of course the sawdust is got acids in it and attracts moisture, and it's going to cause it to rust. So anyway, that should solve that problem. So now we're off to, I got to pull the tarp up on the door again. The wind blew it down a little bit, and then get those 6x6s out of the way. Set up to paint those and get my jointer set up, and we'll start the joint. We'll get this joint going.